Hello chess fans, it's round 3 of the US Chess Championships, and like I predicted in my previous post, we get to see many more exciting games. Well, here we are, it's Hans Niemann playing with the white pieces against Leinier Dominguez. It's an absolute spectacular game. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy watching this video from beginning till the end, and I will explain to you all the ins and outs of this fascinating encounter. Hans playing with white starts the game here with a move 1 e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian opening, specialty of Hans. He has been playing it for many years now with great successes. And Dominguez, well, he is actually a very strong theoretician. So it's interesting to see what's happening in this opening. Bishop c5, castling kingside. Now, early in the tournament, we have seen that game of Hans playing against Caruana, in which Fabi played in fact the move d6, and later on he came up with the original plan of developing the queen to f6. That's something you should check out in one of the other videos. However, Dominguez is a more classical, traditional player, and he develops the knight to its most logical square. Knight f6, attacking the pawn. White plays the move d3, black goes d6, c3, and we are in pretty well-known waters here. Castling kingside, rook e1, a5, it's the more trending line, so that you're preventing white from expanding on the queen side. But there are some drawbacks to that move as well. h3, h6, useful moves preventing any pin from either side. Knight bd2, bishop e6, and here we do get to see that main drawback of the move a5, as here the move bishop b5 is played. That's of course not possible had the pawn been on a6 guarding that b5 square. And well, here there are always plans for white, for instance to take on c6 to remove that nice knight, and then follow up with the move d3, d4 to put pressure in the center against the bishop, against the pawn on e5. And well, black of course knows that and drops back with the bishop to b6. It's one of the various possibilities here black has. But after bishop b6, well, there followed now the move knight c4, as white really wants to get that bishop and ruin the pawn structure. If black would be forced to recapture with the pawn, that would be a significant weakness on the queen side. So interestingly, black goes back with the bishop to c5. I understand that this is against the rules, playing twice with the same piece, going back and forth, but in a way it's justified here, because if you look at white's pieces, especially the bishop on b5, it's kind of in trouble, because if black were to play a move here, knight a7 is a threat. When the bishop is under an attack, if the bishop goes back to a4, then you can follow up with b5 with a double attack against both the bishop and knight. So here Hans is of course familiar with that idea. He decides to anticipate that threat of knight a7 by going back with the bishop to a4, a thematical move in a lot of Italian, Spanish openings, as the bishop can later go back, for instance, to b3, but more often it goes back to c2. But now look at this. Black can take here the knight on c4, which is what happened. Bishop takes c4, pawn takes c4, with an interesting imbalance in the structure, as white does have doubled pawns, but white also has the bishop pair. So it's a bishop pair versus black's knights. Position is relatively closed, and well, it looks like black is pretty solid here. So what should be the plan? Well, hard to say what black should do. Moving the knight away from f6 is usually an interesting move, and that is what happened in the game. Knight h5 is a very ambitious move. In an earlier game, knight h7 was played, which is perhaps a bit more solid. But knight h5 is very ambitious, as it does have the idea of developing the queen to f6. And if you can follow it up with knight to f4, well, then black does establish a nice grip on the king side. So this is all pretty thematical stuff. And Hans, well, he went here for a think, as of course the knight on h5, it feels like it's a bit loose, it's unprotected. But now look at what Hans played here. He played super aggressively, as he felt he needs to punish black's play here by advancing his g-pawn, guys. This is very special. launching the g-pawn in front of your king. It's of course a weakening move for the white king. On the other hand, it's also questioning what that knight is exactly gonna do. If you do go with a knight to f4, white can simply take it with the bishop, and then if you do have to take back with the pawn, well, there's no much pressure for black on that side of the board, so that does look good for white. The knight goes back to f6, and here Hans says, well, I continue with the march of the g-pawn, g5, attacking that knight on f6. Pawn takes g5, bishop takes g5, and now the bishop is back on g5. It was not possible to go there earlier because of the pawn on h6. Now the pawn on h6 has been traded off. Black got to deal with a very nasty pin, which is very annoying to deal with. Now, I think this is already an absolute critical moment in the game, because if you fail to solve your problems regarding that pin, white has a pretty straightforward plan, and he is not in a rush, but he can move the king and develop his major forces in the direction of that g-file to target the black king on that side of the board. So I think that is something black got to anticipate, and probably the best way of playing, which was not done by Dominguez, is the move queen e7. And one idea could be to bring the queen to e6, but another very important resource is to vacate the d8 square for the knight. So rerouting the knight from c6 to e6 is actually quite a nice move to consolidate your king side and challenge the bishop on g5. And well, it's a absolutely unclear position. A lot of things can still happening, but it's a game where, well, you're playing basically for free results still. So that was not played. Queen c8 was the move chosen by Dominguez. It's also quite interesting to step out of that pin, and white cannot ruin that structure on the king side with bishop takes f6, as it does allow this move. Queen takes h3, and well, you're sacrificing a piece, but the bishop is in trouble. If you try to save that piece, then white got to reckon with plans like rook e8, rook e6, and black obtains a massive attack against the white king. So therefore, you better protect your pawn on h3. King h2 was played. You're defending the pawn, but you're leaving the pawn on f2 en prise. And that is actually quite interesting. Black cannot take the pawn on f2. It will run into rook e2 when both the bishop as well as the knight on f6 are in trouble. Because if you go back with the bishop, you can take on f6. If you do take back now, it's rook g2. And well, on the next move, you're moving your knight away so that you can deliver checkmate with rook and queen. That is absolutely crushing. Well, that explains why Dominguez didn't capture the pawn on f2. I'm actually a bit surprised here that black didn't play here this move, queen e6. Seems to me that bringing the queen into the game is a logical defensive attempt, but the move chosen by Dominguez is also understandable, as he's trying to catch that bishop on g5. But there is this move, rook to g1. Nice move, and it's not about that bishop on g5, because if you're ever going to take, white's going to recapture with a knight, and then the queen will come in to h5 with devastating mating threats. And well, still, the pawn on f2 cannot be taken, by the way, guys, because if you do that, there is rook g2, bishop goes away, bishop h6 with very annoying pin, and white is going to win material. So now, after rook g1, queen e6 played. Looks like black is in time to consolidate his position. But now there followed rook g2. Finally, that pawn is defended. But there's, of course, a much deeper idea behind that move, as white is planning to move the queen away and bring the other rook over into the game. So it's a nice way of doubling rooks on the g file. Well, another pawn is hanging this time, as you can take the pawn on c4, which was not taken, as it runs again into bishop h6. And if you do block the threat with g6, of course you can take the rook on f8, but even stronger is bishop to b3, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, you can follow it up with rook takes g6, as the pawn on f7 is pinned and not a good defender. So white has a massive attack. Black should stay away from taking any pawns. Dominguez played knight to e7, attempting to get a knight over to g6. But now the bishop goes back to d2, clearing that g file. And this is also quite an impressive move, I would like to say, because now taking the pawn on c4, it requires much more calculation. Black didn't do this capture, but let me show you the following line, which I'm pretty sure Hans had been calculating. There could follow bishop to b3, attacking the queen. Now if you do take another pawn on e4, there is bishop c2, and look at that queen in the middle of the board. It almost doesn't have any good square to go to. If the queen goes to d5, you can bring up the bishop to h6, attacking the pawn on g7 once again. If you block here with a move g6, now don't feel tempted here to take on f8, because Black will get quite a number of pawns for the exchange. But the stunning sacrifice, which must have been calculated in advance by White, is rook takes g6. Absolutely amazing rook sacrifice. You cannot take with a knight, because then the queen on d5 is no longer defended by that knight on e7. While if you do take with the f-pawn, well, there is bishop to b3, and White is going to win the queen. Fantastic tactical idea for White in this game. But once again, that pawn was not taken. But it's important to understand that behind all White's moves, there is of course also quite some calculation required. Black instead played here knight g6. Now the queen goes to e2, defending the pawn, but also coming up with a more important idea. Queen f6 played. Probably Black is looking for ideas to get a knight into f4. So first, White played here the move rook to g4, guarding that square one more time. That's absolutely fine. Black played the move c6, and now it is rook a to g1 with all White's pieces looking fantastic. King goes to h8, getting out of that g file, and here the bishop goes back to c2. You can still wonder what that bishop is exactly going to do. Well, it's better placed on c2 than on a4. On a4 it is actually out of play, and on a good day, well, that diagonal may become open, and then you need your bishop on that side of the board. Black played bishop b6. It's difficult to suggest a more active plan. White played here this move rook 1 to g2. Subtle, prophylactical play, overprotecting the pawn on f2. Preparing to move the knight from f3, probably to g5. If you would have done that right away, then the pawn on f2 would have been hanging. So that explains White's last move, rook 1 to g2. Black went back with the bishop to d8, trying to gain more control over the dark squares on the king side. Now the bishop is helping in defense, and Black is trying to discourage White from playing the move knight to g5. But now fascinating play here by White as Hans sacrifices the pawn c4, c5. Remarkable move, as I imagine that is not something most of you would have expected to happen here. But in general, the opening of the position, and especially removing the pawn from c4, it will potentially help White's light squared bishop to excel later on. Let's say if the bishop can come to this diagonal, it can hit the pawn on f7 in combination with knight g5. Maybe not right away, but it's something Black definitely has to deal with in his calculations. So well, anyway, Black captured the pawn on c5, and White now continues with the move h4. And it's not about being a pawn down, it's about trying to increase the pressure on Black's position, as White is planning to play here the move h5, pardon me. Now Black played here the move c4. Interesting idea. Black is not really giving the pawn back, because if you do take, the knight on f3 will be hanging. But the plan is probably just to restrict White from activating his light squared bishop to b3 any time soon. White continued with the move h5, attacking that knight on g6. Knight goes to e7, and now it is rook takes g7. Very nice capture, as well, getting two rooks for the queen is not very attractive. There would follow knight takes e5. Here you see that why it is also important to have removed the pawn from d6, with that pawn sacrifice earlier. Here you see that white will obtain a massive attack with 4 pieces attacking the exposed king. White is completely winning here with nice attacking moves to follow next. So instead of taking the rook, they followed rook g8. And also here, I think this is a very interesting moment as black really tries here to get rid of white's most important attacking piece. If you do take on g8, trading off one pair of rooks, white is clearly better, but things are not so simple yet. I mean, black is just a few moves away from consolidating his position and get the rook from a8 into the game. But Hans played a really strong move here as he realized that he can just go back with the rook from g7 to g3. And why is this such a good move? Well, if you do take on g3, I assume that his intention had been to recapture with the f-pawn, and that pawn can be used to come to g4, to go to g5, to attack the queen, and later play the move g6 to open up black's kingside even further. And well, that pawn is used as a battering ram. It's looking very good for white here, and well, also the pawn on c4 soon can be captured. So looks very nice improvement of white's position. So black didn't capture on g3, played here instead the move b5 to protect the pawn. But now another advantage of still having 2 rooks on the board is that white can now in fact play the move knight to g5. And all of a sudden there are huge threats, including something like rook f3, attacking the queen. If queen goes away, then it could be knight takes f7 with checkmate, as both white's rooks are performing fantastically in this attack. Therefore, black is kind of forced to take. Knight takes g5, bishop takes, attacking the queen once again. Queen goes to e6, and before anything else, you just further strengthen your position with the move queen f3, preparing ideas like bishop f6, check, and then try to enter with the rook on g7. Looks really strong. Now, there followed the move knight c8, as it basically is the only square for the knight to go to, and the reason you move the knight away is to contest the bishop on g5. And obviously, if you do take on d8, rook takes d8, it's actually still quite good for white. It feels like you can still try to fight here as black. But the killer blow is to exploit the lack of coordination between black's rooks on the back rank, as there is this move, bishop to f6, wonderful move. Discover check, as here the rook on g8 is actually under attack. By the way, it's not a discovered check, it's a normal check, but it's a discovered attack on the rook on g8. Black is forced to take the bishop, rook takes g8, check, white is up the exchange, and now there are many ways to convert, but Hans found the prettiest move here on the board, and also the absolute killer blow as he played here. Rook e8, guys, game over. Hans Niemann is on 2 out of 3, winning his first game of the US Chess Championships. Beautiful shot as he hits the queen, and well, if you take the rook, rather than capturing the bishop, you first insert this nasty check on f5, forcing the king to go to a square where white can eventually capture the bishop with check. Everything comes with force, and therefore you always got to look first at checks. If you take the pawn, there are many checkmates. Bishop d1 is the nicest move, including that bishop in the attack as well. If king goes back to h7, it is queen to g7 with checkmate. So that's also pretty nice. But by the way, after rook e8, black of course doesn't have to take the rook. But if you, for instance, block the attack on the queen with bishop e7, now the easiest move is to go queen g3. And now you see that why the rook is nicely placed on e8, vacating the g8 square for the queen. So this should also lead to checkmate within a few moves. Anyway, very impressive attacking game. Doesn't happen that often that you get to see such a massive attack at the highest level, especially against a rock-solid player as Leinier Dominguez. So congratulations to Hans. And well, I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the coming rounds at the US Chess Championships. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you do like this video and you want to see more. Thank you for that. See you soon.